There are some people who think it's kind of neat to own their own hearse. You know, a hearse, that special kind of station wagon that funeral homes have. Some people go out and buy used hearses and drive them as their family car. Well, it seems that several years ago, a fellow was driving his hearse down the street in the town where he lived. He had the windows down and the stereo was blaring away at full volume. But when he turned the corner to the street where the local funeral home was, he noticed people walking out and getting into their cars, ready to form a procession out to the cemetery. And so, out of respect, the man slowed his hearse down and lowered the volume on the radio. And then when he got a few blocks past the funeral home, he sped back up and went on to his destination, the local Taco Bell. But when he pulled into the restaurant and looked in his rearview mirror, to his surprise, the entire funeral procession had followed him into the drive-thru. Who are you following? Who is your leader? Back when the United States was first formed, it was the one and only time in our nation's history when there was a unanimous choice about who should be the leader. By a unanimous vote, by receiving every single electoral vote, George Washington was chosen to be the country's first president. But what's interesting to note is that even though the country had just finished fighting the Revolutionary War to get rid of the King of England from ruling over them, there was quite a widespread movement in the early days of the nation to have George Washington named as the new king of the country. As a kind of compromise, the Senate suggested that Washington be known as His Highness, the President of the United States of America and protector of the rights of the same. But when the House of Representatives objected, they ended up agreeing to the more modest title, George Washington, President of the United States. In the Bible, in the Old Testament, from the very beginning, the Hebrew people, the Israelites, were governed as a theocracy. They had a king, and that king was God. When God told the people to leave Egypt and to escape from the Pharaoh, that is what the people did. When God told the people to go that way and to not go that way, that is what they did. And when God set forth the 10 Commandments, those were the 10 Commandments. There were no committees. There were no elected lawmakers, no senators or presidents. God alone was their king. Yes, Moses played an important role, but he was not their ruler. Instead, Moses' role was to communicate to the people what God communicated to him. Eventually, though, after the people arrived in the Promised Land, they began to grumble and complain and said, "We want to be like everyone else. Every other nation around us has a king to sit on their throne. But we don't. We want a king." And so in time, very reluctantly, God agreed to the people's demands. But at the same time, God realized the danger that was involved. The danger that the people would start paying less and less attention to what God wanted them to be doing, and would end up paying more and more attention to what the king wanted them to be doing. king today. We have a representative democracy. We get to vote. But the same basic danger exists. And that danger is this. As a society, do we focus on what it is that God wants us to be doing? Or do we simply focus on our voting? When it comes time to make decisions in our government and in our society, do we focus on what it is that God wants us to be doing? Or do we figure that as long as my side has 51% of the vote, that is all that matters? This might sound like heresy, but voting, democracy, isn't always all that it's cracked up to be. After all, people voted. There were fine democratic procedures in place, but voting and democracy gave its blessing to slavery for nearly 100 years after this nation was formed. In the same way, after the Civil War, people voted. People used good democratic means to write in segregation into the law books all across the land. Voting doesn't always bring out the best in people. Voting, unfortunately, doesn't always lead us to do what's right. After all, while Moses was up on the mountain receiving the 10 Commandments from God, the rest of the people were back down below taking a vote. And they voted to have Aaron make a golden calf for them to worship.